Hey everybody! So I am going to be doing this short lecture over classical conditioning, not operant conditioning, classical conditioning. Um, I wanted to do this because I know that sometimes it's a little confusing, some of the terms, and then sometimes people don't quite understand that two things are really the same thing, just at different points. So I thought we would go over that right quick. So first, let's talk about the components of classical conditioning. First of all, conditioning, both operant and classical, are both kinds of associative learning, meaning you essentially learn that two things occur together. They are associated events. Now, I know that in the discussions that that the book includes and that I'll be mentioning, we're talking about animals. But classical conditioning, these learning principles have been found to work with every animal that we've tested. So, granted, we haven't tested literally every animal on the planet, but these learning principles certainly work with humans. They obviously work with dogs. That's what dog trainers do, is they use classical and operant conditioning. Even amoebas uh, can learn through classical conditioning. So let's start off with classical conditioning. What are the components of classical conditioning? So here we go. Here are the components. We have UCS, that stands for unconditioned response, or sorry, unconditioned stimulus, and the UCR, that stands for unconditioned response. Now, before we go on, I want to start right there. The unconditioned stimulus is called unconditioned because you already know, you already have associated that stimulus with that response. Now, many times your unconditioned stimulus and your unconditioned response are unlearned. So, for example, you don't need to learn to salivate when you see a pizza. Okay? You have your unconditioned stimulus, the pizza, and it automatically makes you respond with the unconditioned response, salivation. Okay? But other times they can be learned. So, for example, if you get excited every time you get a paycheck, okay? Originally, your paycheck meant nothing to you. I mean, it was just a piece of paper, all right? But you learned that when you see that piece of paper, you can now buy stuff. So you have associated, you've had to learn that connection. So we'll come back to that example here in a second, but because once you've learned the association between your paycheck and being able to buy stuff, so the association between money and being able to buy stuff, then money can become a unconditioned stimulus for other things. But initially, it was a neutral stimulus because before you learned anything, it didn't evoke a response by itself. So let's go back to unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response. An unconditioned stimulus is something that naturally, automatically, without you having to think about it, evokes the unconditioned response. Okay? So in the example from the book about Pavlov's dog, the food was the unconditioned stimulus. Okay? The food. Because it automatically, the dog didn't have to think about it, automatically started the salivation. And the salivation was the unconditioned response because, again, it was the automatic response to the food. Now, the bell initially had no association with the response. The bell did not cause the animal to salivate. Now, it might have caused him to jump or something, but it doesn't matter what it could have done to other things. What matters is its relationship, its original association to the response that we're considering. And in this situation, we're considering the salivation. Okay? So initially, the bell did not cause that dog to salivate. So it's a neutral stimulus. It's neutral with regards to its association to the salivation. It doesn't make the dog salivate. Now, many people can get that to that part right there. It's once we move into what is the conditioned response and what is the conditioned stimulus that people start getting thrown off. The conditioned stimulus is and always is the former neutral stimulus. Okay? So what happens is that eventually the neutral stimulus, the bell, gets paired enough times with the unconditioned stimulus. So the bell gets rang every time the food gets presented. Bell, food, bell, food, bell, food. Just it keeps happening. And so eventually that neutral stimulus begins to cause the unconditioned response even without the unconditioned stimulus. So the bell can cause the salivation even without the food ever showing up. When that happens, when the bell causes the salivation without the food, now the bell, which was the neutral stimulus, becomes the conditioned stimulus. So the neutral stimulus is always the same as the conditioned stimulus. It's always the same, no matter what. The conditioned stimulus and the neutral stimulus are always the same stimulus. They're always the same thing, okay? The bell, once it starts causing the salivation becomes the conditioned response. So you can see that the response is the same thing. What is the unconditioned response and what is the conditioned response is the same response. It never differs. It is always the same response. The conditioned response and the unconditioned response are always the same response. Okay? The only difference between a conditioned response and an unconditioned response is what makes it happen. So if it's an unconditioned response, it's made to happen by the unconditioned stimulus. If it's a conditioned response, then it's made to happen by the conditioned stimulus. Now we can think of others. Okay, so let's go back to that money example. Okay, initially. So getting things makes you feel good. Okay, so getting things like toys or something when you were a little kid, getting things was initially an unconditioned stimulus because it made you feel good just automatically. You didn't have to think about it. Just automatically getting things made you feel good. All right, so in this situation, your unconditioned stimulus was getting things and the unconditioned response was feeling good. Now, over time, when you had money, you got things. So money, which originally was just green paper to you, or I guess multicolor paper now. Originally, money had no meaning to you. It was a neutral stimulus. It didn't cause you to feel good. So at that point, money, which was just paper to you, was a neutral stimulus. But eventually, you learned that every time you got money, you could get stuff. So eventually, getting that money started to make you feel good, even though you didn't get things. So getting your paycheck makes you feel good, even though you're not actually getting anything. Does that make sense? I don't know why I asked you that. You can't respond. If you don't understand, please send me an email. Okay? So over time, after you repeatedly pair or associate getting things with money, money eventually starts to make you feel good, even though you're not getting things. At that point, money becomes the conditioned stimulus, and feeling good becomes your conditioned response. All right, guys. I hope that helps. As always, if you ever have any questions, please, 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 please do not hesitate to email me. I hope this helps. Good luck on your assignment. Take it easy.